Good afternoon. We're going to call to order the City of Lawrence Common Council Administration Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Today is September 12th, and it's approximately 6 p.m. Welcome, everyone, and today will be on our agenda. There are some provided in the back of the room for those who may want to follow along with us today. Hello, fellow councilmen. How are you today?
Very fine.
All right. On this committee, for those who may not have attended a finance committee in the past, we have Councilor Tom Chevlot, Councilor Sharon Freeman, and also Councilor Lisa Chavis, who will be showing up here shortly. But we'd like to go ahead and get started with it. Today, the first item, we'll go ahead and pause here for a second. The first item on the agenda actually is proposal number 15, which is the appropriation and tax rates for the 2018 budget. Our Controller, Mr. Fenwick, could you come up, please, to the podium and kind of give us a brief overview about proposal number 15?
Sure. Well, good evening.
Good evening.
And Proposal 15 is the appropriations ordinance for setting out the budgets for 2018. I'm going to walk through, generally speaking, the funds that are involved here. We have the general fund, which the 2018 proposed total budget is $21.7 million. In the category of other operating funds, we have the Motor Vehicle Highway Fund and the Local Road and Street Fund, which fund the street department. MVH Fund is $3.5 million. The Local Road and Street is $769,000. We have the Park Non-Reverting Fund, $275,000. An Animal Shelter Fund at $50,000. The Law Enforcement Continuing Education Fund at $76,500. The Cumulative Capital Development Fund, $480,000. The EMS Fund, $3.9 million. The Police Pension Fund, $467,000. We have the Public Safety Tax Fund in total of $3.2 million. Two internal services funds, the Administrative Services Fund at $1.3 million, Technology Services just over $1 million, and then 4 debt service funds. So that comprises the 2018 Civil City budget. For anyone in the audience, this detailed budget plus a citizen summary and a video are all available on the website, so you can get all the detail that you would wish, particularly if you're having trouble sleeping at night. So with that, that's an overview of what is contained in the appropriation ordinance.
Okay. Councilors, I'd like to open this up for any questions or discussion you may have with Mr. Fenwick.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Fenwick, just a brief question on the general funds as far as I think it's Fund 0615. There's $50,000 for animal shelter. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Sure. The City of Lawrence has had an animal shelter fund, so this is not a new fund per se. What we were proposing for next year was an appropriation of $50,000, and the intent there was to conduct a feasibility study on an animal shelter to see what the cost actually would be to operate a facility in the City of Lawrence. So that was the intent of those funds.
So you're thinking that the historical data that we have on the cost that we did incur as a city 3, 4, 5 years ago was probably outdated?
Number one, I have not had access to that, but 2, yes, it probably would be
Okay.
Potentially outdated.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councilor Freeman.
Would any of this $50,000 go toward the local agreement that we have with Indianapolis we're picking up 8 dogs a month?
The 50,000 would not go to that. This would simply be, I don't have estimates, so I put in 50,000, but it would simply be to do a feasibility study on the cost of a facility in Lawrence.
Do you know how much that feasibility study would be? I'm sorry.
And at the moment, I do not. I would not expect it to be greater than 50,000, but that was how much we put in for that expectation.
I have a question for you. Currently, the money that we do spend for the handling of the animals, which fund does that come out of?
That comes out of the general fund, it comes out of the police budget.
Okay. And so, Mr. Fenwick, I was able to do a little research related to this particular fund. I want to make sure that these numbers that I have are accurate. For 2016, we sent 149 dogs and 120 cats. Each dog we were charged $40 per dog, which gave us a total of $5,960 towards dogs and $22 apiece for the 120 cats, which gave us a total of $2,640. Would you consider those accurate numbers, sir?
I would.
So I didn't tally those numbers up, but it's just looking real quickly, it's definitely less than $10,000 that we spent for handling animal care
Yes, that would be correct.
for the city. And it also looks like I did look to see what the numbers were for year to date for this year, and we are 9 months into this year, and according to the numbers that I have, this year we have sent 57 dogs and 17 cats, so we're substantially less than in 2016. So that cost I expect to be significantly cheaper than the $10,000 that we spent in 2016. Would you say those are accurate?
Only, I would agree that cheaper through the data we have, if we get a pickup, September through the rest of the year, who knows? But yeah, right now,
As of today,
it's
yeah.
it's less than what it would have been last year.
Right. Right. Okay. I just want to make sure that those things are valid and for the record there. One of the, I'm sorry, any other counselors, do you have any other question? I want to make sure that, okay.
With respect to this.
Okay. One of the I guess one of the things that when I looked into funds and looking at that data, I kind of struggled with the fact of the need for a shelter here in Lawrence. It doesn't seem to me, and I would like for the other counselors maybe to chime in on this based on the data that we have. It's in my personal opinion that the need for a shelter doesn't seem to be justified by the current by the money that we spend currently, and so I would be proposing to the financial committee that we look at other ways to allocate this funds to something that would have a more widespread or impact on some of the other needs that we have here in Lawrence.
Hey, Counselor Schiller.
Mr. Fenwick, is it, and I don't know if it is possible, but I was just thinking this, is it possible that if you engage in a feasibility study, that potentially early on you could get an indicator that, as Counselor Giles just read, I'd not heard those figures, but we spend $5,000 a year for animal control. Early in a feasibility, it would be kind of obvious that, hey, this this is a huge undertaking and then we wouldn't necessarily need to spend that whole $50,000. I mean, is that fair to assume?
I think 50 is a high estimate for a
Okay.
feasibility study. My thought would be if we were to go down the path of conducting one, even if early on we realized, hey, this is really going to be a
Yeah,
lot, we'd probably still want to finish it just so we could
sure.
have the conclusions and present those conclusions. But I do think 50 is probably on the high side for a feasibility study.
So then, if early in the process, and I'm just thinking this through, but if early in the process it's determined that it would be an expense that we wouldn't be able to absorb at this time, we could just do a reappropriation of those funds back into another category. For example, if it's sidewalks or roads or things that might be of general nature for the entire community.
We could.
Yeah, okay.
So I guess my question is, if we have a feasibility study, if there truly is, and we need confirmation of that, a feasibility study that was done as recent as 3 years ago, if we could just get that study, if appropriate, because we don't know, we haven't seen the study, if there's variances in the numbers, then obviously the study could be outdated and other factors as well. But if we couldn't use that as a baseline, if we decide to go down that route, I don't see why we would invest in doing a feasibility study from scratch and basically spending the same money that we already spent 3 years ago with the potential of getting the same result. And I'm not sure if that's a good use of the city's money. If we can't leverage what we have versus investing more money with no guarantees that we're going to get the outcome that, it's any different.
Like I said earlier, I have not seen that study, so I'd certainly, like to see that. And then it, quite frankly, could be possible that maybe that study just needs to be updated itself, which certainly wouldn't require a brand-new feasibility study. But yeah, I think that could be a possibility.
So as the controller, if you were to use $50,000 for the city for priorities that you have, where would you use that $50,000?
Well, as you'll know, in this budget, we have added a couple of new line items, not in the general fund. As an example, in the street department, we have dedicated $100,000 for streetlights, which I think has been, in my 18 months here, one of the more frequent, concerns of the citizens. So we did add $100,000 for that. One of the problems we have, though, with our streetlights is we don't have a very good inventory in the city of Lawrence of what lights do we service, what lights are IPLs, and even to this point, what lights are working and what aren't. So I think a good starting point, if I had 50,000, would be to have that inventory done. And then depending, on what the inventory says, we may be able to now say, okay, here's an area where our lights are more not working than working, and we can dedicate additional funds for streetlights. So I think the inventory plus addressing streetlights would be one area that I would recommend. If I had $50,000, I would put the money to use.
Okay.
Excuse me. If there's, are there any other further questions or comments or discussion related to proposal number 15? If not, I would entertain a motion to recommend to council for a motion, a motion to recommend to approve or not approve ordinance number 15.
I'll make the motion.
That's I think we need a second on that motion.
Second.
Second, okay. So it's, a motion's been made by Counselor Chevallot and seconded by Counselor Freeman. All in favors? All opposed? All right, motion carries for proposal number 15 to be recommended for passel at full council.
Thanks.
All right, yeah, I was gonna tell you, don't leave. All right. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is proposal number 16, which is civilian salaries for the year of 2018. I would like to open this up to committee for any, well, first of all, I'll ask for if you can give us a brief overview of this proposal, please.
So proposal 16 is the civil city salary ordinance. It's civilian positions only. We have bumped the salary range by 3% on all positions. The intent there is employees would be eligible next year for an up to 3% amount. One thing we will be implementing with that are performance reviews. So in order to be in consideration, an employee will have had to have a performance review. There are two new titles in the salary ordinance. I'm calling them titles because we're not adding new employees into these positions. The first one is the Public Information Officer. Jimmy Griffin, who has been on staff here as a media specialist, has evolved in a much bigger role for the city itself. He does a lot of communications externally, and given the level of work he has been doing, it warrants the PIO position, in my opinion. And then the second one that has been added is the Director of Communications, which would be the Director of the 911 operations, which is a function that effectively the employee is performing as a director of that. And that's pretty much it with this.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
What is Jimmy's current title?
Media specialist.
So he'll be doing
Vacant.
that role as well?
Yes, that's kind of morphing all into this PIO
Okay.
position.
So in the past, the PIO was Gary Woodruff. So Jimmy will be taking that out front position on working with the media on public safety issues, or is that still going to be?
Gary would remain
Okay.
in the role that he's in, but I think Jimmy's function, just take, for example, the communications that he's done with the budget, on some of the utility
Gotcha.
rate work. There'd be more things along that line, but Gary would continue to do what Gary is doing.
Okay.
So the media, I'm sorry. Anyone? Any others? So I want to, just for clarity's sake, because I glanced at it, the media specialist position, though, is no longer in, okay? So, and then the Director of Communications position, what was the position that person was in before?
Actually, the position also functions as the executive assistant for the police chief, so that is a position in the salary ordinance. There are, that position would stay as an executive assistant in the ordinance, but the title would change for this individual to communications director.
Okay.
There wouldn't be an intent to then fill an executive assistant in the police department, serve both roles.
Okay. So the roles and duties and responsibilities of the director would continue to be those other positions. Okay, that's. Councilors, do we have any further questions related to proposal 16?
There's two positions. I just want to make sure, in the last budget, were there any positions that were in the salary ordinances that weren't filled?
I only have 16, or proposal number 16 in front of me, but I do know in this proposal, there are 3 positions: chief of staff, deputy chief of staff, and the planning and building director, which are positions in the ordinance, but they're not funded.
Funded,
in the
okay.
budget, so there's no plan to fill those positions.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Are we okay, guys? With the, all right, so,
I do have one other brief question. You mentioned the up to 3% pending annual review. Do you know, had there been a consistent process in place to do performance reviews on the city employees in the past?
I can't speak for several years past, but from what I've seen, no, there hasn't been one.
Okay, so essentially what you're doing is putting in those processes so that they'll be tied to a metric of up to 3%. Okay, thank you.
and those performance reviews will be done by that person's direct supervisor?
Yes.
All right. If there's no other further questions or items for discussion on proposal number 16, I would entertain a motion to be sent to council.
Motion.
Motion. Motion's been made by Councilor Chavis. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
It's been seconded by Councilor Chevrolet. All in favor? Those opposed? No. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is for proposal number 17, which is the police and fire salaries for the year of 2018. Mr. Fenwick, if you can give us kind of start the discussion off about proposal number 17, appreciate it.
Proposal number 17 should be fairly straightforward. It's the salary ordinance for police and fire, all positions. It has a 3% salary increase in there for 2018. I don't think there's anything else for me to point out.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty straightforward. Do we have any questions related to that from the councilors?
I do have one. I believe it was 3 years ago, there was an initiative by the former fire chief to move a position from a salary to an hourly, and I believe it was the battalion chief. Dino, do you remember that? That
For the example tonight, that was for the overtime because they're on shift for 24 hours. It was for that reason, for the overtime.
Okay, so that's staying in a hourly position so that they are able to capture overtime and not in a salary, exempt? Okay,
And that's, I would add, that's not been changed in this ordinance, so that's the way.
See that. Okay, I
it
just-
has been.
okay.
If there's no further questions, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Motion's been made by Councilor Chavis. Can I get a second?
Second.
Motion's been seconded by Councilor Freeman. All in favor? Those opposed? No. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is proposal number 18, which is amending the municipal code of the City of Lawrence of Indiana regarding employee benefits and overtime. If you could, I see you got backup coming. If you guys, how are you, sir? If you guys could give us a little brief overview related to proposal 18, appreciate it.
Sure. I'm going to kind of give an overview of why we're making some of the changes, and I'm going to let Mr. Johnson kind of get into the specifics on those. It's probably no secret, but we do have a pretty, I'd say one of our biggest challenges overall as a city is funding some of these obligations that we have that employees have earned over the years with accrued leave. It is an earned benefit, therefore, we certainly can't take that away. So it's a currently a $5.2 million liability that we have, and that's all accrued leave earned throughout the city if everyone left today, which they're not, but that is the liability is $5.2 million. What's of immediate concern to me is employees that are eligible to retire, so those with greater than 20 years of service. That current liability is $1.4 million. Just looking out, those who would be eligible to retire 2 years from now, which would also include this pool, it grows to $2.5 million. So we certainly have a reasonable challenge, as these employees do either retire or leave employment with the city, of honoring these obligations. Just to get a little more specific, about half of the liability is from earned sick and vacation time. And not to get ahead, but Proposal 19 is related to getting out in front and starting to fund this, but that's the financial challenge that we have. And so Proposal 18, while it doesn't take anything away from current employees, it does start to stop this growing problem, particularly for new hires. And so I'll let Mr. Johnson walk through the rest.
Thank you. Like Mr. Fenwick said, the goal of this is to have a limited effect on current employees and help to stem the tide a little bit as we move forward. So starting with vacation leave, right now, currently, vacation leave is given to employees in arrears. So this change that we're making is that you'll accrue it, each employee will accrue it on a month-to-month basis. What we found is that employees wait until the end of the year, wait till the beginning of the year to retire, get all of their vacation hours, and it makes it harder to plan and that sort of thing. Also for new employees, they'll be accruing vacation after their first full month, so instead of waiting for a year to have a vacation day, they'll start from the beginning. The changes in vacation leave policy do not affect full-time police officers and firefighters. They're going to stay under their contract. They're staying under the what we have in place currently. Moving down to bonus hours. Bonus hours are provided to full-time police officers, firefighters, EMT and paramedics, and communications staff because they're needed to work on holidays. So they get 96 bonus hours. Police and fire will stay the same as they are. For current firefighters that were employees in effect as of the effective date of the contract. For everybody else, beginning in 2018, they'll get the 96 hours, and then they can roll those 96 hours over to the next year. After that, it's a use it or lose it policy. So they'll still get that paid out. The current hours that they have, the current bonus hours that they have will be frozen, but it's just going to kind of stop for everybody other than full-time police and firefighters. It's going to stop the huge accrual amounts of holiday hours that or bonus hours that we've seen. For sick leave, again, this doesn't affect current full-time police officers and firefighters. Hours accumulated prior to January 2008 are going to be frozen. After that, employees will continue to accrue at the rate of 8 hours a month, so a day a month. And then they'll be able to carry over a maximum of 200. So basically, an employee that has, say, 1,000 hours of sick leave built up over the years, they're going to have basically 2 banks of sick time. They're going to have the 1,000 that's frozen, then they're going to be able to accrue up to 200, carry that over, and then the following year, they'll continue to add on to that 200, but they'll only be able to carry over 200. The employee that has the 1,000 over here will still be able to utilize this, and this will still be paid out upon termination or resignation, separation. That just won't continue to grow. So we're just going to have these banks, and then new employees are just going to have the 200 that they'll be able to carry over. By the end of the year, they'll be at 296, and which will, we think, give them some protection in the case of a major illness or surgery or something like that, but also not have some of these banks that are growing. Personally, for civilian employees, will be discontinued as of January 1st, 2018. Accumulated personal leave is frozen, so if an employee has accumulated this personal leave, they'll still be able to utilize that. It just won't continue to grow. For LFD, those are called perfect attendance days. Those are not going to be affected by this. And for personal days for LPD remain in effect for those officers employed as of the effective date of the collective bargaining agreement. Compensatory time and overtime. Exempt employees may no longer accrue compensatory time. They're exempt, so they really shouldn't be accruing any additional time for additional hours worked. And then comp time and overtime for other employees is only earned after working 40 hours a week, after the fully scheduled week. Right now, it's on a day-to-day basis. So this is just making that slight change that it's on a week-to-week basis, which is in accordance with FLSA and just about every employer that I've heard of. So, again, police and fire was not amended. And then we made some technical changes to the Family Medical Leave Act just to kind of bring it up to date with federal law.
Councilors, do you have any questions related to this proposal number 18?
So I have a question. The liability of $2.5 million over the next 2 years, so that's city employees only, or does that include police and fire?
It includes police and fire, so that's all
Okay.
city employees.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Councilor Freeman.
Is this about the same from last year, or is there something new that,
Is
We
about the
occurred.
same.
is this the same that we occurred last year? I know on vacation days and PTO days, you would have to take them at the supervisor's discretion. So most of the time, people, you may have someone calling in sick all the time, and then somebody that's there all the time, and they want to schedule when this person's calling in sick. Is what type of conflict?
I would say generally speaking, it's growing. So it's not a number that's static. So it's going to continue to go up absent these changes. So it's a growing number. So it would have been smaller last year.
So do we have people like wait until the end of the year to like, I'm not going to do anything, and then boom, I want the check?
Fortunately, we've only had one retirement this year, and it actually just occurred. So I think throughout the year, whether it's big, yeah, you certainly would probably see more, I would say, in the early part of the year. But, again, it's personal decision on when they've chosen to make, their retirement. But, like I said, fortunately, we only had one, but the problem is, you get one retirement, that's in some cases the equivalent of greater than a full-time position. And so therefore, depending on when it occurs in the year, we may not be able to rehire for that position until the next budget cycle.
So I just want to make sure, for clarity's sake, if I was kind of understanding where Councilor Freeman was going, you can only be paid out at a point of separation. You can't request for your sick time to be paid to you at the end of the year, even though you're still currently employed.
Separation, correct.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I applaud this effort. I know this council has tried since my tenure, has tried to get a handle on this because it's a huge unfunded liability. When you looked at this and you put this in place, specifically under the Section 1, which is the years of service, and it maxes out, have you modeled this forecast and say, okay, what does this look like in 10 years? And at some point, we start to build up our capital to be able to pay these out, where it kind of has that demarcation point where it flattens out and then we're in the green?
I've tried to.
I would be quite impressed if you had it down to the year, but
And, the challenge we're going to have is we're putting money into the trust, hopefully this year. If we get retirements next year, which right now, I'm not aware of any major ones, but that's not to say we won't have one. But if we get retirements next year, we should pay that out of the general fund or whatever other fund, not the trust fund. So the trust fund's got to get up to at least $1 million. So
Okay.
we're going to be budgeting about $200,000 to put in there this year. So really, we're probably at least 5 years away before
Okay.
we may be able to say, okay, now we don't necessarily have to worry about the budget impact.
Okay. I tell you, I guess that makes a lot of sense. I guess that just brought up, though, a concern to why I see why you're awful concerned, because even with the procedures and processes that you put into place, which I think are absolutely fantastic, but 2 years from now, it gets a little shaky if I'm looking at the numbers that you presented to us.
It could.
It could, yeah. Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure that I was kind of getting a good understanding of what we're trying to do and what the challenges are. But that makes even more sense from when I was reading over this stuff prior to the meeting. So that's thank you. It's good insight. Any other further questions? If not, any other further questions from the council, I would definitely entertain a motion related to proposal number 18.
So moved.
Motion's been made, and second?
Second?
Okay, it's been, motion made by Councilor Chevrolet, seconded by Councilor Chavis. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you so much. And just for clarity for those at home or in the crowd, these motions are in effort to make a recommendation to the council by the Finance Committee for approval, but of course they have to be approved by full council to be binding. All right. Moving right along, proposal number 19, which is transferring unused and unencumbered tax levy funds to the general fund. Would you please elaborate on that, sir?
Sure. So we have 3 dormant funds that have literally sat, I'll call it empty in terms of activity since 2010. These were predominantly, one of them was from a previous debt fund. That those bonds have been matured, so those funds will sit there in perpetuity if we don't transfer them via this ordinance. One was another developer's escrow fund, and then this CUME cap building fund, but all 3 of those have had no either revenue or expenses since 2010. They're deemed to be dormant, so they will just sit there. And so what Proposal 19 would do would be transferring those funds to the general fund, and it's slightly over $200,000. And then those funds, once they hit the general fund, will go straight into the trust fund, which will then begin to build reserves for those liabilities. So that's, in essence, what Proposal 19 is doing.
Any questions?
I have one. Was there any consideration of, rather than putting it into the trust fund, to put it into the general fund as like an emergency fund in the event that you do have 3 or 4 retirements next year?
You know, there was, obviously, in the budget process, we do ask department heads, are you aware of any retirements? And obviously, that's not to say there won't be any retirements. They're not aware of any. I felt reasonably
Okay.
somewhat confident, given the unknown, that, we should transfer this to the trust. And then if we do get a retirement, depending on if and when it happens, we'll address it then.
So, since you said you'll address it then, what were your thoughts on how you would go about getting the $200,000 to fund that retirement? Where do you think that money would come from?
Well, if we do have a retirement next year, I guess number one, it would depend on what time, when in the year that occurred. I would say on the roster of possibilities, the severe liabilities we have, I don't think would occur next year. So it's very possible to just absorb it in that budget. If that's not a possibility, we would have to ask for an additional appropriation, but I think that's worst case scenario at this point.
Okay, any further questions? If there's no further questions, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Motion made by Counselor Chavis, second, need a second?
I'll second.
Second by Counselor Chevlot. All in favor? Motion carries.
Thanks.
All right, stay close, though. Okay, on our agenda, there are a section in here, other items to be determined by the committee chair. And so what I would like to do for those citizens in the audience, that I would entertain any citizens' comments in this committee. Please be mindful that we would like to keep those comments to 3 minutes. Actually, 2, sorry. Before we go there, I just thought about it. Let the counselor. Are there any additional items that the counselors would like to bring up to discuss related to the budget with Mr. Fenwick?
Yes, sir, actually, thank you. This kind of passed by me. Just one of the things that I saw in the budget proposal is assessed values in the revenue. It's widely known now, I think, that tax caps, although they initially hurt, the county's gone back and now have reassessed a lot of properties, and so the assessed value's going up, which means the 1% of 200,000 is different than 1% of 220,000. So I've noticed that we show that as an increase. Do you expect the disbursements for 17 to still come in at budget? Do you expect, or are you hearing from the DLGF that tax receipts would actually be higher than what was proposed?
My expectation is that the 2017 collections right now will be slightly higher than what was budgeted.
Okay.
And then therefore, the 2018, we're allowed 4% growth by the state for 2018. So a combination of the higher collection this year plus that is reflected in the 2018 proposal on revenue.
So, given that, do you intend to use those incremental funds to start building up this emergency fund that we talked about last year, or what was the plans in the event that it does materialize?
I'd say for now, what we've budgeted revenue-wise is funding the general fund as it is, so there isn't any additional funding in the general fund to contribute to the trust fund. I think my thought for next year would be, as we get into mid-year, again, depending on whether we've had retirements or not, we should be able to look at where we are from appropriations and then be able to look and say, okay, we ought to be able to take a certain amount of what we have and make an additional contribution. But I think going forward, we're going to have to find a way to start building in a contribution to the trust fund into these budgets, because otherwise, there's no point in having 200,000 in there if that's all that's going to be in there.
And then my last question for now, I noticed a slight increase in the revenue that we receive from Republic. And so, going back to the contract, is it in line with the contract? Because I thought that there was a pivot point at like year 5 or 6.
So the Republic contract, what we pay them goes up 2%.
Yeah.
What we're collecting, we set by ordinance, and that hasn't changed. So the revenue is going to be reasonably static. Now, the 2018 number is very close to what we actually collected in 2016.
Okay.
So the 2017 number is probably a little conservative.
Okay,
So
okay,
that's the
that explains it. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, have we taken under consideration that we have to transport the prisoners downtown? Do we need to get another paddy wagon, hire more policemen, or is that?
I have not looked into that. I don't know if the police chief would want to comment on that, but I know I have not looked into that yet.
That is a very serious concern for the city of Lawrence, City Speedway, Beech Grove. There have been no hard decisions made by the sheriff's department that I'm aware of at this point. I know that's a looming threat, and we're hoping that the budget deliberations at the city-county building will help overcome that. However, we may very well be in a position where we have to transport our own prisoners, and if that is the case, we do have a functional paddy wagon. And I have directed the commander of our reserve division to start looking at a strategy for employing and deploying reserve officers as transportation. So basically, we're going to be shifting some responsibilities and assignments if that is the case. But yes, I, like fellow police chiefs in Marion County, are paying very close attention to that.
But you do think we'll be okay as far as not needing any additional appropriations, but just there's some managerial things that you will have to do to.
That's what we'll start out with. I hope to not have to come to you in 2018 requesting an appropriation. But we're going to do our best from a management standpoint to handle whatever comes our way in terms of that.
All right, thank you, sir.
Do we need to probably put in reserve more paddy wagons, or do we have one that's up to standard?
We do. We have one that's functional right now, and worst comes to worst, we may have to purchase another vehicle. I hope not to have to do that, but that is something that the controller and I will discuss if it comes down to that. We have, I don't have the exact numbers for you, and I can come to the council meeting, the full council if you like, with these numbers. But in terms of the amount of transportation that we do, it pales in comparison to IMPD. And so, you know, I can bring you some of those statistics to kind of give you an idea of how many times we would have to run downtown as opposed to call for a sheriff's transport wagon. But it happens a few times a day, so it is a significant issue.
Excuse me. Do we have a holding cell strong enough, or do we need to build another one?
We don't. There are a wide variety of regulations that we would have to comply with that make prisoner detention here in this building just not feasible. In fact, before my arrival, we have a bench in our squad room where we keep arrestees temporarily until they're transported. That bench used to have basically an ankle type of a handcuff, right? That we could actually secure a prisoner there with an ankle cuff, and that had to be removed because that put us in another category of facility detention. And as I said, there's a whole list of things that we would have to do from a construction standpoint and a reporting standpoint that we're not prepared to do. So I know it's kind of a long answer to it. Do we hold prisoners here in this building? The short answer is no, but the long answer kind of explains why.
So to Counselor Freeman's point, so, I mean, are you not concerned from a budgetary standpoint, or you are concerned? So I'm not,
No, I mean, I am. I mean, we're looking, a prisoner transport wagon could be upwards of $45,000. And that's not in here right now. So it is, it's a concern.
and so what is your, if that were to happen, and I guess we'll know soon, because they're going through the budget process too.
Certainly.
So that would be relatively quickly that we would have to scramble and figure this out.
Absolutely.
Your holding cell, what's your, where you would hold the prisoners?
Right?
What is your, what are you thinking the option would be for that?
There would be no change as far as that's concerned.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
It's just because we're transporting, don't mean we have to start holding people. You're
That's
gonna-
correct.
you're
It's,
gonna take
this
them
is
straight
strictly a
downtown.
transportation issue only, not
Okay,
a
okay,
detention.
okay, okay.
And there may be some other things that Lawrence can do. And again, I mentioned my fellow chiefs of police, that we may be able to work together. And, you know, maybe we transport Speedway's prisoners on one day and they transport ours on the next. And there's all kinds of options that we're going to be looking at. This won't have a crippling effect on our police department operations at all.
Okay.
Would we be responsible for their medical injuries or?
That I haven't heard about. I understand that the Eskenazi detention facility issue has been resolved. So I can't tell you for sure, but I can certainly come back and report to you at full council if you would like.
Do we need to put some money toward the prisoners' medical?
Well, that's a astronomical number.
Okay.
Yeah,
That would take a huge,
We don't have that kind of money.
no.
right.
We need to get them downtown and let them take care of it. With your shared ride program that you were just describing with Speedway. I know we wanted to be a light of time today, but I did have a question for you, Mr. Fenwick. I was looking at in the fund, and I was actually particularly looking at the city council fund, and I was curious I understand the internal service charge fund that we put in place last year, but I noticed there's a $13,000 charge to the city council fund for the internal service charges. I'm just curious to exactly what those charges are.
So last year, if you recall, we did set up those two internal service funds, one which is for administration, which is predominantly just the function of the controller's office. The second one was for IT, everything in the council chambers, computers, et cetera. And so there's a chargeback to departments and funds for those services, so that's what that charge is. So
Okay.
it began this year, and the amount that's in there for 2018 is just based off of those two budgets.
Okay. So IT and the HR portion of that. Okay. That is anything that you guys may have related to the budget. Okay. Well, we'll have also too, guys. We'll have opportunity to discuss any concerns and stuff that you may have further in the budget at the council. But we wanted to make sure that we got through these. Want to give the opportunity that I spoke to just a moment ago for anyone here who would like to have any citizens' comments. I want to give the opportunity to approach the podium now, if anyone has any comments.
Good evening.
Hey, how are you today, Councilor Wells?
Rick Wells, member of the City Council for District 2. And a few items that I would like to convey my concerns. Of course, I'm sure you know the animal shelter was foremost on my mind as, we tried to get an animal shelter here in the city. One question I did not hear asked is, I'm a little puzzled as to why the administration would want $50,000 for a study after we've done already give away the building that could, or that actually had been set aside to be an animal shelter. And, just on the off chance that this study would come back and say, yeah, it's warranted for an animal shelter, then what? We've given away possibly a $200,000 asset that would have housed an animal shelter. So now we got to try to find the funds to try to do it all over again. And I just don't see that as being real likely. But the other thing I'd like to say about the animal shelter is the facts and the numbers that you have derived from the animal control people. Really, it just reflects the amount of animals that they themselves have picked up, that they have found running loose, that they have captured in whatever their scenario. I know for a fact, in talking to many of the people that wanted to volunteer with the animal shelter, that there is a network, I guess you might say, underground of people that are finding strays and that are taking it upon themselves to finding homes or dealing with these strays in some humane avenue. Most of the people that I know of that have dealt with these stray animals have, in fact, either found the rightful owners or found them new homes, which would have been, that would have been the job or the purpose of an animal shelter as we, or as we had hoped to have had. All of us people that wanted an animal shelter, we were promised a shelter. We weren't promised an investigation or a study. So like I said, I'm a little puzzled as to why this study is being done after we done got rid of the building. But the other thing on this proposal 18, I'd also like to keep the council to keep in mind, I've been coming to council meetings for a long time, and I know that I've gotten quite a few concerns from some city employees. And in attending these meetings, council meetings in the past, and the budget meetings in particular, that the city employees were promised a lot of vacation time, days off for one reason or another, but all of it was in lieu of pay. So I think we need to be real conscious of the fact that any attempts we make of diminishing their vacation time or sick leave or whatever other kind of accrued time that they have, we also could be cutting into what was promised them in the past in lieu of pay. So my understanding is this. This proposal 18, even though it was sponsored by you, Councilor Giles, was actually originated from the administration. Would that be true?
Yes, that would be true.
And then my last thing is proposal 19 and this transfer of funds. It says here that that the funds should be transferred to the general fund or the rainy day fund. In listening to this, I didn't hear anything about the money going to the rainy day fund, but it would be going directly to the general fund. Would that be right?
Oh, I thought it was going to the trust, the proposal.
No, the general fund.
It's going to the general fund, then to the trust.
Then to the trust.
Okay.
Ultimately, it would be in the trust.
So then the rainy day fund should not have been mentioned on this then? Would that be
I think it was an or.
It says or.
right?
Or,
Okay.
And I could let Mr. Johnson clarify that. I believe by the state statute, you have two options to transfer these funds. One is the general fund, the other is the rainy day fund, so
Well, I guess
that's why
my,
that's why that was in there.
well, my concern is, would that not, if the money was in the rainy day fund, if we don't really need the money, but we just need to be able to get our hands on it, would it not be better for it to be in the rainy day fund? It would improve our bond rating?
Well, I would say no, because right now we're building up our operating reserve in the general fund, which kind of sort of acts like our rainy day fund. And given the liabilities we have, to me, it's more important to begin to address that and therefore transfer it to the trust fund.
Right. My concern is the rainy day fund also would give the council a little more latitude as to what in particular did happen to that money. But if it went to the general fund, I don't believe that the council would have any more latitude on it, would it not?
Well, the proposal here is it's going to the general fund, and then we will then transfer it to the trust. Once it's in the trust, it can't be used for anything but paying out these accrued payouts, which is the intent of that. So I guess your question would be, if you don't trust me next year, when I transfer it to the general fund to then put it in the trust, you'll be able to see at the next month's financial statement whether I actually did or not.
Okay. Well, that's all that I had. That's all I had. Thank you for your time.
Okay. I have a question for the city, because I want to make sure that things are clear. So, did we give the building away to? If we gave the building away, to whom did we give the building to?
Stearns. Economic developer.
The building in question hasn't been sold yet, so it's still in the process with the RDC. What the council did with the RDC was transfer it to the RDC to be able to then sell it for an economic development.
All right, so the building is still belongs to the city. It's just under the management of the RDC, but there has not been any selling or giving of the building away to anyone. It hasn't even been put up for sale yet.
Correct.
Right, thank you. Just want to make sure that things are clear. There's folks at home watching. All right, if there's not anything else to be said, I'd like to have a motion. Oh, look, we got someone else here. All right. Looks like another familiar face.
I can barely see him. He's kind of camouflaged.
Sorry, I was working earlier. I appreciate everyone up here and respect you for on this hard job. It's not easy. I got two questions. My name is Robert Jones. I live at 11546 Admirals Lane, Indianapolis, Indiana. On proposal number 18, if I understand it correctly, and I may not have, my understanding is, I know we have the police and fire, and then I consider the city employees as civilians, that they would lose 3 days of personal time starting next year, if I understand it correctly.
That's a good question for Mr. Fenwick, because that was not part of the discussion of that exact scenario. Or, I'm sorry,
My
Mr.
understanding was
Johnson.
personal time would be taken away starting next year if this is passed, unless I misunderstood.
For civilians,
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
yeah,
So they would lose 3 days,
potentially.
potentially.
Could you explain to me the potential? I want to make sure.
It's 2 hours personal time. If they have a perfect attendance, you multiply it times 12, it's 24 hours, and that gives you 3 days.
So that
If
was,
somebody calls in sick, 1 day in a month, they don't get the personal hours credited to them, so.
because they don't have perfect attendance.
So under this, that's why it's potentially 3 days.
So I guess my question is, do they still get the 2 hours if they work all month, or are we taking that away next year?
There's no additional personal time. It's vacation
Okay.
time, sick time.
Okay, that's what I understood. Okay, that's just one of my concerns for some of these employees that have been here, is that if they work all month and have perfect attendance, that we give them 2 hours, and then next year, if this passes, they'll lose that. So that's kind of incentive to have them come to work. So I guess in the scheme of things, we're kind of taking 3 days away from them potentially if they had perfect attendance. So that was a concern of mine. The other thing is, I know we have some injured officers. I don't know the exact number. I heard maybe up to 5. We have some retiring. So with proposal number 19, with that money getting transferred to the trust, it seems like we're going to be covered, we'll be okay. But if we find ourselves in a pickle and we need money, can that money be transferred from the trust back to the general fund? Or once it's in there, does it have to stay?
What's this?
Okay.
And
all my
it is concerning that you have heard that there's 3 retiring, because we're under the impression there's none. So that's a huge risk for us. So you might want to talk to the police chief and the controller.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Is there any other citizen comments? Okay, as seeing that there is none, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, meeting adjourned.